With 15 numbered entries and another 100 or so sequels and spin-offs, it's difficult to boil the world building in the Final Fantasy JRPG series down to a few core elements. In its quest to emulate these games, tabletop role-playing game Our Stormy Present settles on two. There must be an empire, and there must be an airship. We started our game on one, tormented by the other. In a perverse twist on Final Fantasy IX's theatre play opening, us child detainees were being forced to perform patriotic propaganda aboard our prison ship for our captors. When by chance a sky pirate crew launched a raid in the middle of a show, the opening was there for us to herd all the other children, sneak out into the chaos, and steal a ship of our own for a grand getaway. For my first Spell Token press review, I wanted to look at a game from 2021 that I don't think got a lot of spotlight attention, but has produced a real highlight of a campaign at our home table. Our Stormy Present, OSP as I'll call it, is the first release from designer-writer duo Max Knightley and Holly Hutchinson, under the name Blackberry and Holly. Players take on the role of party members in a JRPG that never was, putting aside the grind of random encounters and meticulous inventory management, in favour of telling a story with the dramatic, rebellious, and often tonally bizarre beats of video games from the era. Our Stormy Present is a title that has the unfortunate sound of a JRPG title that's been put through Google Translate a few too many times, but I will say that the slash-through title and shattered crystal makes for a pretty great logo. The purple, yellow, and blue colour palette of the cover art carries all the way through the book, and the weird arms on the airship are a great detail that tells you so much about what you're in for. Layout work is done by Minerva McJander, a designer so outstanding and prolific that seeing her name in the credits of a gamebook is a seal of quality. OSP uses the Sparked by Resistance rule set, developed by Rowan, Rook and Descartes for games like Spire and Heart. Players roll pools of D10 dice for challenging tasks, and when there are complications or failures, you mark a number of points on one of the stress tracks that reflect your body, your awareness, your emotional state, or your finances. You have a couple of shared tracks too, one for your ship, and another called Kismet, that brings unfortunate events down onto the characters. Each time you take stress, you risk incurring a negative penalty called a fallout. It's the only SBR game I've seen that opens this section with an explanation on how to create your own fallouts, and it becomes apparent why they've done this when you see how thin this section is. This is an inherited issue from Spire, I think, and it tries to mitigate the effect by making most consequences narrative rather than burdening a new GM with the task of inventing interesting mechanical consequences tailored to the scene on the fly. Your character's skills are broken into 9 broad styles, which do an effective job of pushing players to take exciting actions. My rally style meant that I ended up pushing my teammates to join in with the increasingly far-fetched team attacks I was coming up with, and my friend's steel style was an incentive for them to always be standing in the most dangerous spot at any given time. You'll be starting with 3 styles at most, and having to spend a whole advancement to get another means that you'll often be passing them up in favour of the flashier abilities offered as part of your archetype. The counterpart to styles is moods, which are the different aspects of your personality and core values. These also give you extra dice on your rolls, but come with a downside called a drawback trigger. The idea is that moods like rage and idealism can be helpful, but in situations where your mood becomes a fatal flaw, the rules are going to change a little. Instead of difficulty removing dice from your pool, a drawback will ask you to roll all your dice and then take away the best results. I want to drill down into this, because it's statistically a significant handicap. Say you've got a dice pool of 2 and a difficulty of 1. By default, this means you only roll 1 die, and you've got a 50% chance of succeeding. Under drawback rules, this drops to a 25%. But what if you're after an unqualified success, in that 8 to 10 range? That's a 30% with normal rules, and a measly 9% with drawback. Is drawback supposed to be punishment for playing against type? Some of the examples suggest this. The Dread mood has a drawback trigger for offering mercy or charity, but mostly they're reactions to being put in a bad situation. It requires the GM to be paying attention to every player mood at the table and deploying threats accordingly, which isn't always going to happen with all of the other elements they're juggling. The only place you're guaranteed to see it is in the biggest of boss fights. In our case, we've gone through multiple sessions without drawbacks coming up at all. Equipment is mostly kept narrative, but OSP really touches on something great with weapons. You're given 3 potential loadouts. 1 weak but versatile, 1 strong but impractical, and then 1 medium all-rounder. You then get to craft this weapon yourself, adding positive or negative tags to balance out its comparative strength. I adore my Typhoon Blade, a legendary storm sword that creates gusts of wind and lands every blow with a thunderous crack that can be heard for miles around. Some traits are locked to die size, giving those underwhelming D4 weapons a leg up with tempting tags like parry, quick draw, and poisonous. I'll move on to archetypes, which are each based around a JRPG trope, and decide your starting styles, moods, and resistances. Each archetype comes with 2 to 3 core abilities, which establish something about your character, let your players establish things about the world, or give you an ability that's mechanically useful but not flashy enough that it's likely to get taken as an advance. Hero, heir, and turncoat all get a work with the GM prompt to create NPCs. The hero gets a mentor, the heir gets a powerful dynasty, and the turncoat gets an imperial foil who has been tasked with hunting them down. Low and medium advances for each archetype tend to skew towards giving the players new ways to influence the narrative rather than improving dice rolls. The Roughneck's low advance, talk shit, get hit, is a great example. Once per session, you can taunt a group of enemies that outnumber you, and they'll send a champion out to fight on their behalf. Win, and they'll all retreat. Lose, and you'll be taking D6 clarity stress and knocked out for the rest of the scene. This scene could happen to any player, of course, but the Roughneck's advance lets them frame the terms of the engagement, put a spotlight on themselves, and keeps the GM from pulling a, well, they all attack you anyway, after the big moment is done. Medium advances don't always feel particularly separated from low ones. Often, the difference is just, this would probably have more of a drawback attached to it as a low advance. The exception seems to be the pet archetype, representing your JRPG mascot type characters, which starts off with some underwhelming core abilities, and then by medium is growing extra limbs to do violence better, and wiping out whole rooms of enemies with noxious biochemicals. Your structural perfection is matched only by your hostility, one medium advance ominously warns. There are 2 kinds of high advances in OSP. The first is just a ridiculously good ability. I'm partial to the Scoundrel's Take It All advance, which makes them such an incredible thief that they can steal abstract concepts and memories, as long as they replace them with something else. The other kind is marked as a quest advance, and it sets a massive project into action. The Scholar's Beyond the Fragile Flesh promises you an indomitable mech suit, but you and the GM need to decide what 3 rare items you need to collect to make it come together. There are extra advances after this, unassociated with any archetype, and I'd describe them as a fascinating scramble. Each one requires you to complete a challenging task, form a true bond with your airship, become known for your cool fashion sense, travel to a different time or dimension, in order to get a new refresh and a new suite of advances you can pick from. It's hard to imagine the circumstances where a character might find time to spend 2 weeks straight in the wilderness, but these advanced trees are good at being evocative and getting players thinking about long-term goals. Everything after this point is listed as appendices, which is the book's way of telling you that you've reached the end of what's strictly required to play the game. OSP is packaged with 3 sample settings from the world-building school of make evocative names and let the reader's imagination fill in the rest. Each one has a broad stroke setup, some mood notes, suggested media seems to have been left out of the final version, and then a handful of locations, potential allies, and enemy stat blocks. Each one comes with a suggested airship build and 3 mega projects, which are villainous schemes that the Empire could have underway. Swirling ink in countless colours is the strongest of the 3 settings. Archfey ruled the last corner of a dying world using futuristic tech and soldiers brought through rifts in time. It's referred to as a swashbuckling setting, which makes sense when you drop the modern high seas connotations of the word. The Fae all share a condition called storythink, a belief that the world is a narrative that revolves around them, and the player's best hope to defeat them is to snare them in their own strict adherence to genre conventions. War Beneath 3 Moons is a modern Cold War setting with a deep state conspiracy, a prosperity doctrine church, and a constant web of proxy wars being staged in city-states across the planet. Some elements will appeal to fans who prefer the science part of Final Fantasy's science fantasy aesthetic, but the flat tone and samey locations made it the weakest one for me. Much better is the climate apocalypse of neon-stained snow, where misguided geoengineering has brought on an ice age ruled by brutish extortionists. Isolated settlements set up defences against the weather, the roaming troops of the Fire Brigade, and the ancient killer robots wandering the wastelands following cryptic and outdated orders. Even if you don't go with any of these package settings, our GM built a lighter in tone world with Final Fantasy IX and Ni no Kuni as the touchstones. I would highly recommend at least going through the mega projects. Each one is broken down into how they're doing it, what they still need, and how they can be stopped. The answer to the last one is often go in and break things, but the mega projects that step beyond that and ask you to pull off a ridiculously daring feat are so exciting to read about. They make good long-term frameworks for the game, and give your empire some agency. They may be tyrants now, but the opportunity is there for them to get so much worse. The book closes out with some GM advice on storytelling, and takes the time to address a few aspects of the system worth being aware of. Characters are powerful, but a wide swing range on stress dice means that every so often things will take a turn into disaster out of nowhere. There's a guide on how many advances you should be handing out, and a list of each archetype and what a player choosing that archetype is likely to want to see in the story. Our Stormy Present is a strong entry to the small but growing Sparked by Resistance game library, and I'd love to see future games draw on what it does with the weapon system and with moods, which make for a clever alternative to the toolbox's location-based domains. It's an effective game for telling a JRPG story with a strong narrative thrust, and even just excels as a power fantasy about characters taking on threats the size of entire nations and coming out on top. I have big plans for my hero and the future ahead of him, and it's great to know that I can play him in a game that knows when to push back and when to let you be cool by stepping out of the way.